You want to use the lavalier?
Yes, please. Do I really need all this stuff on the
No, it actually kind of helps if you don't wear it either, just because we won't get any,
Not flying around.
yeah, hitting the microphone, making any noises. Okay, so this, if you just want to clip it right in the middle of your white shirt,
Wherever you think will work best.
use my reach.
I am using the clicker.
Yeah, certainly. And then we have the on and off switch right here for you. Want me just, you want to turn it on when you're ready to go?
I think we're about ready.
Yeah.
So.
So if you just want to flip it on, you can clip it on your outline, or if you got a pocket or anything like that. Fantastic.
Do you want to do sound check?
I already got levels back over there, so
Okay.
we could do that.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right.
All right. We'll start getting back to our seats and get ready for this afternoon. Yeah. Okay, welcome back. We've got two more expert voices who we're going to hear from this afternoon, looking at the policy angles of research data and privacy, and then some of the international legal framework issues around research data and privacy. And then we're going to end this afternoon with a roundtable discussion about some of the issues, some of the points that were raised during the course of the day, and some of the things that, again, kind of focusing on a practical output of today. What can we bring back to the interest group and hand off to the task groups that are part of that interest group and say, out of this meeting, we focused on these particular issues, and this is where we're going to, these are issues that different task groups should explore in more detail. So our first speaker this afternoon is the esteemed Christine Borgman, who is a distinguished professor and presidential chair of information studies at the University of California at Los Angeles. She is also the author of a variety of books. Big Data, Little Data, and No Data is one of them. And I'm very pleased that she could join us today and give us some perspectives on some of the policy issues around research data and privacy. So, Christine.
Thank you. It's great to be here and also to talk about some of the things that I spend a lot of time on in my day job, but I don't get to talk about publicly. Because most of the time I'm talking about the scientific data practices issues, and if you've read this book, you'll see there's it's a small sub-thread, but certainly a continuing thread of privacy and confidentiality concerns. And this goes through case studies in the sciences, the social sciences, and humanities data as well, and looking at what some of the issues are in different areas. We don't need to spend much time on the national and international policies around open access to data because the rest of SciDataCon and RDA will focus on these in much more depth. But I do think it's worth pointing out that despite the plethora of open access policies and data sharing policies, privacy is at best a footnote in most of these. It's really not very well attended to, except for leaving it to local communities. And that's a lot of where we end up is your local communities. And I'm going to talk about sort of the university and academe as the local community. I've been a privacy activist on the side throughout my career. How many of you know EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center in Washington, D.C.? 20 years old, very active public interest group. I've been on the advisory board since the beginning. I'm in my third term as a member of the board of directors. I spent a lot of time with Mark Rotenberg and that group, and they've been very helpful to us in thinking about policy in the university. Now, University of California is particularly known for faculty governance. And we spent a lot of time in committees, a lot of time developing curriculum, but we also spent a lot of time on thinking about governing data, privacy, and so on. We have an academic senate that's not only active on the 10 campuses, Berkeley and UCLA being the largest, oldest, and best known, but there's 10 campuses from San Diego in the north to Davis, San Diego south to Davis in the north. This is one that's really been reconstituted lately, is the Academic Computing and Communications, and I'm vice chair going in to be chair of that for next year. And we are dealing with a number of privacy and data governance issues through that venue. And we started this just as there was a major breach of medical records at UCLA that resulted in many lawsuits against the university. The lawyers came out in force. And of course, the president of the University of California, Janet Napolitano, is herself not only a lawyer, but the former head of Homeland Security. And when the orders came down privately from UC Central that they were going to put monitoring equipment on all 10 campuses, but not tell the faculty because they were only going to keep it under legal privilege, you can imagine what happened when the faculty found out about 6 months after the monitoring, really wondering what was being monitored. And we try to deal with it through the channels of the academic senate. The Berkeley faculty went to the New York Times. Okay. And so you'll find plenty of press out there of the kind of monitoring. But the result of that was we demanded more seats of faculty on the UC-wide Cyber Risk Governance Committee that's overseeing this. So David Kay and I and a couple other people are now spending even more time in Oakland trying to deal with these policy issues at UC-wide. So that's where we've gone into some of the other risk issues. And let me take you on. This is another one that we did UC-wide, and the Privacy and Information Security Initiative, this was initiated by Mark Yudof, the previous president of the University of California, also a lawyer, to revisit some of the issues of privacy, electronic communications, information security, and risk. And UCLA was the farthest along in developing policies, so there were 3 of us from UCLA who participated. Part of what came out of this is we now have a chief privacy officer on each of the 10 campuses, and we have some kind of a privacy board on each of the 10 campuses. We also have a chief privacy officer for the entire University of California who is in the offices in Oakland and helps us coordinate things. So that's helped. UCLA has been the most active. We set up this Information Technology and Privacy Board in the year 2000 as about half faculty and half staff, but chaired from the faculty and is jointly appointed by the provost and by the academic senate. And this has been a very activist group over the years. But early on, it became very clear that the privacy issues risk swamping the entire set of policy issues for the campus. So in 2005, we spun off a separate board on privacy and data protection. And Mark Rotenberg helped us with this and some of his staff from EPIC. So we've now got an entire decade's worth of institutional memory. And now privacy, when you're in Los Angeles, often involves things like going face-to-face with the recording industry and the motion picture industry who wants to show up and add monitoring equipment and attach it to our networks and saying, oh, we'll just look for the violations of intellectual property for you. You won't have to bother, we'll just attach and do it. And the usual response is something like, over my dead body. And we have managed to push that off. But we've managed to push it off because we've had these very strong rules and policies that we've been able to enforce over the years. So that's kind of the background of how we ended up here. Kent Wada is the Chief Privacy Officer for UCLA, has been for 10, 15 years now, and he's taking on an even larger role. And we were charged by the provost of the university, Scott Waugh, and by the then chair of the academic senate, Jan Reif, to deal with this much larger set of issues around how we govern the data at UCLA. And because so many other universities are addressing these issues, but we seem to be the first that's really gotten a board together with the imprimatur of the top management of the university, we've written the report, which is now up on this website, and I'll post these slides, and Todd will post these slides too, and you'll find it easily searched under that. We have written it in such a way that we hope it can be readily adopted by other UC campuses and by other universities. We've gotten a lot of inquiries and participation. So these are the questions with which we were charged, is how should we collect, organize, and use research analytics, things about our community. We spent a lot of time dealing with what that meant. Who should have access to these within the university, and also in the kinds of public-private partnerships. And nowadays, as we outsource more and more of our services, access to internal data about the community is becoming a stickier and stickier issues. We were asked to address what principles as distinct from what processes there should be. And the charge letter is up on this website too. So they gave us 6 months to do it. We've finished it in just under 2 years. And not for lack of due diligence. It just turned out to be an even harder problem than we realized. And again, this is with people who have 10 years of experience really trying to wrestle these down. This is the board that we were given. And I would emphasize, if you're going to move forward some of these issues on your campus, get the right people at the table, people who really have experience in dealing with the privacy issues. Notice on the faculty side, we got a member of the IRB, the Human Subjects Review Panel. Vicki Mays, who's in psychology and health, spends a lot of time in Washington on policy issues. And access to clinical data. One of her specialties is particularly about diversity and minority access to healthcare. Neil Wenger is the chief of medical ethics at UCLA, again, a major medical center. They also gave us a policy analyst who knows how to write university policy as staff to the committee, which Anna Joyce was very helpful. Across here, we have people who run some of the internal systems and also have to use them, because there's a whole lot of personal data that the university is required to report to the state of California, to federal offices, to accreditation agencies. So you can't just suppress, all of these things. You have to have ways to release them in appropriate ways. Amy Blum, our senior campus counsel, has worked with us really the entire 15, 16 years of the ITPB. And again, to have somebody who's very good legal counsel, who has the history of working within the university and on the side of the faculty, really, really helps as you're working through these. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about the specifics of the process and what the report looks like and the recommendations that we made. We started by distinguishing between data collected by our community and data collected about our community. So research data is sort of the larger realm here, but what we find is we have many other kinds of data that get generated, some of which become research data. I mean, several of the speakers so far have said, research is an unstable concept, data is an unstable concept, privacy is an unstable concept. All of these things are, and we find that despite having, very good oversight of human subjects, HIPAA, personal identifiable information, FERPA, and a sophisticated group, a whole lot of these things just fall through the cracks. And that's one that turned out to be really difficult. Is there's a whole lot. It's surprising how much you can do to violate privacy and still be completely legal within FERPA, PII, HIPAA, and so on. So that's a lot of where we spent time looking at that group. Now, we focus primarily on 2 scenarios as just a way of chewing on what the topics and concerns were that got us this point, on student records and on faculty records. Now, when you start to ask students, and all of you are or were students for some long periods of time, what data exists about them, you know, they know about Facebook, they know about driver's licenses, but the fact that this, you know, it's a Bruin card for us, everybody's got some kind of electronic ID card, what is attached to that? We not only know when you've been in the library, what you checked out, we know how you use it as a debit card. We know if you were eating paleo or pizza. We know if you were doing your homework at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning, because we have the entire course management systems. If you're in the dorms, that card may be a key card. We know when you've been coming and going. Incredible amounts of things attached to it. The university is the internet service provider for people. We've got your email. We've now outsourced to Gmail. If you think about the amount of data exhaust that gets generated by students and how unsecured much of that is at most universities and the lack of governance around it. Now, the faculty records turned out to be quite a different set of issues, and for some reasons they're not as obvious as you might think. I'm going to walk you through what some of those are. You would think that things like your publications, your bibliography would be at least nominally public data. And that's what we do. We want to, you know, let everybody know who we are, put up our websites, put our Vita out there. But there's questions of who should have access to those, what they should be able to do with them. Your grants, you know, the funding agencies will show usually who they've done. The teaching evaluations go into your personnel file. Most of this goes into your periodic reviews for promotion, tenure, and so on. If you're librarians, you know, many of that as well. So let me walk you through again these couple of scenarios that we worked on. So student records, we started asking questions about what the university collects, so some of those things that I've just talked about. What can other entities collect? There was a side conversation that Micah and Lisa were having before about what happens when you subscribe to, you know, this, that, or the other service, and who gets access to that. We have found that, you know, if we have things like the course management system, we have something called the Common Collaborative Learning Environment, which has Moodle underneath it. It's open source. We control those data. If you've got something like, you know, Blackboard or those, there's a couple of others out there, you can make contracts, but it's difficult to make those contracts, but you want to write them with your lawyers at the university level. There's also a lot of kind of front-end user interfaces that are very easy to stick in front of your course. The instructors like them. It's just a click-through license. And what the instructors may not realize, and certainly students don't, is that when they stick those things up there, they are giving the students' data away. There's a very well-known one that I won't put on video, but we can talk about on the side, that is actually selling the students' data to employers, even though the universities, you know, the instructors are putting it up for free. Okay. All kinds of things. And then it's also sort of where the layer of the license is. If an instructor assigns an online textbook that has, again, some kind of data exhaust that's going off it, the students paying tuition is required to use this textbook and doesn't have a whole lot of, you know, opt-in, opt-out choices. So it's these kinds of contracts. And you know, once these data are flowing back into the department, back in the university, are these going over encrypted channels? Are these work-study undergraduate students who have access to these data in these offices? You know, how do you protect them? Who should have access to them? And again, there's quite a bit you can do with FERPA alone without violating it. Everybody knows what FERPA is? Everybody does it? Okay. Family Educational Rights and Protection Act, is that right? Roughly, it's a very old one, but it goes back a long way. Now, the learning resources, those are being addressed by a number of groups. This was the first Asilomar conference. Kent Wada went to the second one, which was just recently. Some of the folks at the Berkman Center, Harvard, and others have pulled this together. So there's getting to be a great concern about what you can do with some of these. And EPIC is working on a student privacy bill of rights. Okay. Getting this implemented campus by campus is not easy, but part of why EPIC is interested is if they can come up with some best practices, some templates, some things that universities can adopt. And given the change in relationships between universities and students, and whether they're considered employees or not, I think you're going to see more pressure for these kinds of say, bills of rights. Now, faculty records. The US situation is considerably different than the European one. I think I should note that for the Europeans, and particularly the British. I spent a lot of time at Oxford and other British universities. My last two sabbaticals were, that book was written largely at Oxford. And the research assessment exercise, the research excellence framework, there's very similar things in each individual European country. There, you are required to build a profile. There's the EuroCRIS, the European, help me with the research information. What's the C? Current research information system, okay. And so like the Netherlands, where we've also done a good bit of work, each university or other research institute is expected to implement some particular piece of software, train everybody. You've got to put your CV in there. You've got to put all your publications, all your grants. You're maintaining a database as you go. Americans, particularly in like the University of California, find that to be anathema. The UCLA is very lately finally going to a completely online system. And there's a lot of people willing to throw themselves in front of the bus to maintain a paper-based system. Now, that sounds completely crazy. But this is, the sensitivities have to do with if we put all of our Vita online, what can the department chairs do with it? What can the deans do with it? Who has access to it? How does it get released? Who can mine it? Who can combine it with other kind of data? What kind of judgments are going to be made on it? Those things are, pretty much standard practice now in most of the European countries, but they are not in the US ones. And that's part of the pushback that you're getting is how the uses can be made of these. We're getting into all kinds of different metrics and huge inconsistencies. We've done a lot of work, Micah and I have worked on, and Todd to some too, on the data citation process. And that started out as the idea, we'll just find a good standard way to cite data. And I point out that if you go into Zotero, you will find about 7,500 at last count different bibliographic formats. We can't even agree on how to cite a journal article, much less how to cite data. Okay, it's a mess out there. So that's part of the concern is the lack of standardization and how it is you can do it. So this is just two, side by side of a blue book versus an APA form. Actually, this is a Chicago style form. The MIT Press form for the book did not actually fit any of those 7,500 formats, and we had to write our own scripts to customize it to make them happy at the end. So one of it is also data mining, and companies like Elsevier and Thomson and others and Nature are really going into the data mining business. When you see things like the digital science, the SSRN, others being bought up by large publishers, that's part of what they want to do, is mine and build maps. And faculty are concerned about releasing their data in ways that can be used if they don't have any control over the secondary uses. Similarly, on the instruction, there was quite the flap around whether the new online academic personnel system should have access to the formal evaluations for instruction. The Office for Instructional Development says those teaching evaluations are for improving instruction. They're not for faculty evaluation. Therefore, you shouldn't be able to have access to them as a direct feed. Well, now you've got a real clash there because, of course, deans and department chairs always love to have those. So who's the data steward and who should be able to set the policy for who's able to use these data and for what purposes? This is one that I'm happy to tell on myself, is I ran the numbers for last time I was up for review, and in 2014, I'm supposed to use the little icon thing over here, if I want to point. In 2014, and it doesn't show up, I was listing about 200 publications on my CV. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. Okay. And Google found almost 400 of those 200. Okay. Thomson Web of Science found 145, which is more like about what you'd expect, the ones that would be in the index journals. Scopus only found 77 of those. Okay. And that's, because I'm publishing more in the sciences and the computer science and social science, I'm not publishing as much in the humanities. So if you use Scopus to evaluate me, I'm not looking too good. But my friends in our history, they might look a whole lot better with Scopus. And you come over here, and by the time I tried to update this, UCLA had canceled our Scopus subscription, so I couldn't make them consistent anymore anyway. But look at these difference in numbers. If I want to say what my H-index is, I like that number a lot better than this one, and I sure like it a lot better than that one down there. Okay. So it's these secondary uses of these data is a lot of what people are concerned about, and we also got very concerned about, that's not going to work either. Okay. Will that work? Okay, the slide clicker's not working, and the arrow's not working. Neither one of these is working. Okay, we'll let the nice man come do this, and I'll just tell you what's on the next slide. So the next slide is at something called Bruin Walk. The Bruins are the UCLA team, and we got very concerned in the early days of domain name system about who had .com and who got .edu. So we have a Bruin in the domain name, but it's got a .com after it. So this is a private entity. Do students notice the difference between .com and .edu if it's got Bruin in it? Probably not. But this is the Rate Your Professor, and it looks like a UCLA site. It's even got the nice blue that's up on it. So we want to, we don't want the feeds that are coming straight off the university going into those kinds of sites and being misrepresented. Okay. This appears to be an interoperability problem. We ran through these slides before. Okay. Let's see, what have I got after these? See if you can bring them up. Okay, after I've got a Bruin Walk slide, and then I've got the 5 recommendations to walk you through. Okay. Change the batteries. That's a good idea. Okay. All right. He'll deal with the batteries, and we got the next one. Oh, now that works. That's fine. Good. Okay. There's the Bruin Walk. Does that look like a UCLA site? Kind of, sort of, but it's a commercial site that you can go rate your professor on. Okay. Most of us don't even want to look there. Okay. All right. So here's the recommendations that we came up with. The first one is scope, and if you were paying attention to the charge, scope was not one of the things we were asked to do. But we spent more time on this than anything because we were asked to come up with about our community. And just deciding what about our community means turned out to be really, really messy. And so this is where the lawyers said it's things that we possess. Not necessarily things we generated, but things that we possess. We might have created it, we might have gotten it from someplace else, somebody else might have collected it, but that also means if you sent us a letter and had some data in it, we now possess that. We may not have wanted it, but we now possess that. So then we have to take care of it and be concerned about it. So we are excluding things if they're already well covered by IRA, by HIPAA, or by PII. So we think those things are fairly well covered already. This one looks kind of simple, right? If you really want to govern your data, it seems like the first thing you want to do is figure out what you've got. Well, we're kind of on both sides of the fence on this one because they got started on inventorying some of it to build the personnel management system. But if you inventory all these data and create another nice database that says, here's where all the personally identifiable information are on the UC campus and who's in charge of them, you have just created a massive honeypot for people to come and raid. So we're trying to figure out, how do you inventory things well enough to know what you've got to need to govern without creating, this is part of the conundrum that John Wilbanks was talking about, without creating one big target that itself exposes those data. And we don't have any easy answers. Batteries, that was the thing. Okay. Third is the best practices. And we decided, let's not start from scratch. So this was one of the easier ones. Again, because we'd spent that 10 years on the Privacy Data Protection Board, and that we had also put a lot of effort into this model for privacy and information security. Now, this one is worth reading very, very closely. Because we think this is one of our most important contributions from that UC-wide Privacy and Information Security Initiative. Because people started thinking about, oh, it's, do you leak, is the driver's license, is the medical information going to get leaked? Where in fact, that is only a small part of the problem, because you want to protect that, but you also want to protect the autonomy of people's privacy. We want people to be able to move around the university and not be watched. So we do not want the movie industry, the recording industry, to be able to watch you. That's a very different concept than the idea of, are your data going to get leaked? So we're reinforcing the autonomy privacy versus information privacy, and the information security covers all of these. So again, this is very well documented in both the Privacy and Information Security Initiative and the other. We also came up with a set of, when do we actually need to review something? So here's some triggers for the review. When we're going to make decisions about people, that was the number one that kept coming up. When you're collecting knowledge, when you're connecting data about people where they don't realize you're collecting data, and there's plenty of examples of that. When the data are being used in unexpected ways, so all those data from learning management systems, the personnel systems, and when you're sharing them with outside entities. So often to make a contract, whether it's Google Gmail, whether it's course management systems, you've got to share some level of data. So when any of these things happen, that's when we trigger this review process. That's the third recommendation. The fourth one is, let's not create a whole new bureaucracy, because that's one of the problems with, even the chief privacy officers will tell you, is that you walk in the room and they think you're the person who says no to everything. You want to get a very collaborative kind of environment where people are willing to come to you, willing to work with you, and we want to extend the structures that we have put in place. And so these are ones that Kent Wada, my collaborative chief privacy officer, assembled just to show what some of the maps are, where the provost head of the university, we report to him with this. We've got voting members and non-voting members. We've got that in place to work with. And that board is the primary mechanism that we are using. And the IT Planning Board needs to coordinate with the Academic Senate, with these other oversight bodies around the campus. Lots of rollouts here. And then Kent, there's a real person in this box, deals with this set of issues, and he's now getting a little bit more staff, at least on a startup basis, to deal with the triage. So he'll be the first point, is that group, and the review boards, so the triage, and then we come back to the activities. So the activities then are, we recommended rollout of these principles, adoption. It's already been posted by the provost. It's starting its way through the Academic Senate for full blessing, as these things take time. But we also want to do various kinds of rollout. I got John Wilbanks and others come to campus, help us roll it out, and to deal with the effective data governance. So that was a lot of material in a short period of time, but this is kind of some of the discussion questions that I thought would be good to leave you with, and ones that might guide whatever few minutes we have left to think about these. is our biggest concern tends to be the kinds of data or the uses of data that are not covered by these laws or policies. And as I mentioned this morning, we decided that the notice and consent are necessary. You still want notice, but the difference between notice and consent and informed consent is a huge gulf. And that's certainly what John Wilbanks was explaining. So we decided to focus on the uses of the data, say we've got to have notice and consent. We're not giving those up, but we need to think about how we move forward into the uses. Should we be scoping this by the people on whom you're looking, by the uses, or by sort of who does the collecting or who does the using? Okay. And that will be worked out as we move forward. We're working on the criteria for the triggers, the values, the practices, and we really want governable processes, ones that are not creating a whole new infrastructure where people are going to say, I don't want to talk to you people because I won't get an answer for 6 months. We want a way that you can get quick answers for things and ways to say, this should go to IRB, this should go here, this should go here, this needs a full-blown review, and be able to move that through as efficiently and effectively as we can. Okay. Let me just put the acknowledgments up briefly, and then I'll take it back to this. So I work very closely with Kent and Jim Davis with the Port on the Campus, and this UC-wide initiative was very, very formative in helping us deal with these things on the campus issue. And we hope that we've developed a model that other campuses around the country, and maybe even other countries, can make use of. So thank you.
So, thoughts and questions for Christine?
Hi. Okay, it's on. My name is Sandra DeQuisto. I'm over at Colorado State University's Global Campus, and so we are entirely online. So obviously always on my mind. Mm-hmm. One thing that I was struck by in your presentation was to consider the data that you obtain, even if you didn't really collect it. So one of the things that we've been working on is actually getting data from credit bureaus to understand better who our students are. So currently it's all been, data that's come back to us that are not line item identifiable data, just in general, 25% of the sample look like this. But now we're engaging with another company, with Experian, who does say that they could provide line item data. So Sandra is found to have the persona of live for the minute, versus Christine has a persona of, say, a penny saved is a penny earned. So my question, which I know this was long-winded, is what are your thoughts then on receiving these type of data back? They wouldn't go into the student information system. They're used really just in institutional research and marketing. But I was struck by that statement given my current initiative on my own campus. So I wondered if you had thoughts.
Many, and again, this could be a very long conversation, so I'll try to keep it short. We're very conscious of the creepy factor. And that's something that most students would think really creepy for you to be getting those kinds of data. But at the same time, I can understand why you might be getting them, and credit risks and various other things of student loans. On the other hand, we are extremely concerned about thoughtful uses of any kind of data. Students get most of this discussion. And some universities are using these kinds of data. I mean, there's massive amounts of data that are thrown out by just massive amounts. And they are throwing them into algorithms, and they are labeling students whether they're red light, green light, yellow light. They're just throwing them into 3 categories and saying, is this student have risk factors? Should we call this student into the counseling office? Should we counsel this student out of computer science or math and into something that is less challenging based on this algorithm? And we find that very scary too. It's like over-algorithmic use of these data. We've really resisted those kinds of things and tried to look for, and that's why it's about, what should the criteria and the values be? Our values are, are much about, diversity and social justice and making sure that people aren't judged prematurely based on some numbers, and it's very easy to come up with those sorts of models. So I would say be extremely cautious because a whole lot of folks out there who don't come up through policy and privacy and sensitivity start with, if it can be collected, it will be collected, and once it is collected, people will find other things to do with it because it's there. Mark Rotenberg says, if you can't protect it, don't collect it. And I think that's a very good motto. Again, it's simplistic, but it's a way to start thinking about kind of what you've got and what to do with it.
Hi, my name is Vrij van der Boom. I work for Open Knowledge International on future TDM. And you mentioned...
What's TDM?
Text and data mining.
Ah, okay.
So my question is also related to text and data mining. You already mentioned that a little bit, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on it a bit more. What are specific issues using data for text and data mining?
Well, in text and data mining for students or faculty or both or all the above? Oh, for research, okay. Well, one of the parts, and you notice sort of one of the early slides, I put a kind of research being evaluation research. And this one turns out to be very, again, very messy, where if you do a survey of the faculty or the staff for the purposes of improving services at UCLA or at Colorado State or whatever, and if you say it's for improving services, it's not for publication, it does not count as research under IRB guidelines. You do not have to go through IRB for those. And so people are collecting all kinds of things under the umbrella of evaluation that the IRB would never let you get. And then, not uncommonly, they're coming back later post hoc saying, oh, there's cool stuff in here, I want to publish it after all. Now I want to get a IRB certification to mine existing data, which is often easier to get. And again, if it gets collected, somebody will find a way to use it and want to use it later. So, so we're trying to look farther down the line. One of the things that came to the Privacy and Data Protection Board that was brought to us by the first Vice Chancellor on Diversity was one where they called it a climate survey. And they wanted to know how how were you comfortable? Was everything kind of working the way it should? Are people respectful? Is it sexual concerns? Is it ethnic concerns? Is it religious concerns? Whatever. How are you feeling around here? And they had built it with the personnel record system such that you had to click what your job category was. Well, there's people in job categories like the assistant university librarian for this, that, and the other thing. Was one person in this category. And Vicki Mays, who was up there, said, you know what? How many African American female department chairs in life sciences are there, really? And there's a whole lot of things like this. It's and it's done under evaluation. And it's the kind of, the mosaic, the data mining, the reaggregation that John talked about and our colleagues in the medical areas talked about as well. That you've really got to think about these things at the point of collection. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do is sensitize people. And if that vice chancellor had not come to us and said, this is coming down from Oakland, from UC Central, we are told we have to do this. I do not want my office's name on this. And she found she couldn't actually stop it, but she could, she could soften it, and she could make sure that Oakland was stuck with the responsibility and not her, and she refused to, take it and mine it and do anything else with it. So people are concerned, there's a certain amount of ownership of the data about what it gets used for. At the same time, we are a competitive university. We want to know how our students are doing. We want to know what our marketing should be, what our outreach should be. So that's why we had people on this board who do some of the institutional analytics, and they do them for development and so on. So we're very aware that you do have to collect information about people, and we have to collect a lot of things around, diversity, sexual orientation stuff we'd really rather not collect, but the state of California requires us to collect. So things we have to collect, we would prefer not to collect. We are very hypersensitive about how it gets used for any kind of data mining, and that's the stuff we're really going to sit on tightly. But UCLA, I must say, having been out and about with these issues for a long time, I do think we are much more cautious than most universities are on this front. Please.
On the line here. Hi.
Okay, and then,
I'm Elise Dunham at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign Library, and I'm curious, especially since I'm based in a research data service at the library, in terms of triage and the governance processes, where do you see the library fitting into all of that?
The library, we have made sure the library has had a seat on the Information Technology Planning Board and on the Privacy and Data Protection Board from the very, very beginning. Because libraries, and I am a librarian also, are very sensitive about collecting personal data. But at the same time, libraries have said, you know what, Amazon has all those recommender systems and people love that stuff. And should we do opt-in? But if you only do opt-in, you're not going to get the rich data set. So libraries are kind of thinking along the line here too of we're competing with a lot of different entities we never competed with before. And their libraries are being pushed. So libraries have a very strong ethical stance on protecting those personal data, but they're being pushed from behind on the other way. Who was it? I think it was Lisa who said before about, we will only take things into our repositories that don't have PII in them. Well, that wipes out a whole lot of the data that you might get. So libraries, in order to run the repositories, again, has to be thinking about these and should have a seat on whatever board like this is set up on campuses, in my opinion. Do we have time for one more? Or? One more. Okay.
Just one quick one.
Sure.
My name is Sabrina. I just wanted to get your thoughts about do you see any value in data management plans being used as a tool at the point of collection in this context?
As in the NSF data management plans and the other funding agencies?
Yeah, so that you can start articulating what it is you want to do with the data and kind of capture a lot of the things that you mentioned.
Yes, and I teach the data courses, the graduate courses in our school, and most of the data management plan systems, they've been set up with the faculty will tend to take them and treat them as a template and just fill in the boxes. And the way that the libraries have set up, there's sort of a 1-hour interview. And the kind of research we do, you cannot understand somebody else's data in 1 hour. They can't explain it to you in 1 hour. So I have my students out in the field for a 10-week term, just working with a group, helping them develop a data management plan. And it takes them at least the first half of the term, the first 5 weeks, to understand what that group's data are well enough, even to give them some guidance on it. And the second half of the second course, the second 10-week course, I have them work with a research group that wants to deposit some data and work with an archive that wants to take it and negotiate that process for what it's going to take to get there. I think the data management plans are a tool that can be used that way, but it's going to take a lot more than a 1-hour interview to sensitize people, because we've got, if data management plans are really going to be useful, if people think about what are your data, what might you use them for, who else might use them, for how long, for what purposes, that's a whole educational process. And the data management plans as they are currently used are a little bit too much of a template. They're a starting point, they're better than nothing. But I think we've got a long way to go before we can really turn them into an educational program. And that was what the recommendation 5 is. It's not enough to write this report and walk away and say done and dusted. You've really got to have an educational program, and you've got to deal with it way back down. And students, students can now build massive databases for their dissertation. Students are data stewards. And students are clueless often, because it's just not part of the graduate program. So I think it's got to go all the way back into the graduate training for people to think about what are their data, what is sensitivity, what's worth keeping, if you can't protect it, don't collect it, and so on. So under the general rubric of data management, we've got to go. We've got a lot of education, and the librarians, the library community is much more sensitive to these than anybody else is. So let's hear it for libraries, and I'll give it back to Todd. Okay.
Hooray, libraries.
Okay.
Thank you, Christine. One point here, one of Christine's discussion topics, and I don't want to get into this now, but I want to kind of highlight it for discussion as we get towards as we get to the roundtable session, is this question about scoping data governance problems and the three different angles, if you will, of looking at these questions around data, research data and privacy. This also came up in the discussion of the interest group in the Tokyo meeting about the scope and who our final outputs audience would be. And I think this is kind of would be an interesting topic to kind of discuss a little later, is as you look at these different questions, the output of the interest group and the scope of our work shifts slightly based on whether you're focusing the output of this group on, say, the members of an IRB, or researchers, or data administrators, or libraries, or whomever, or people who are reusing data. And how might we as a group deal with some of those variances? I think is worthy of a good conversation amongst. We could talk about this for half an hour or so.
And I hope you don't mind if you talk about it without me, because I am double booked as a delegate to the General Assembly, where I need to go back.
I think
to.
You're always double booked.
I hope that most of you will be around Tuesday afternoon. I have the privilege of being the closing keynoter, and I will try to wrap out some of these in other policy areas. So thanks again, Todd, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Christine. Yes. Christoph, do you?
Yeah, Todd, just in relation to the last point that you made, Christine, was so in the specific setting of the management of the the governance of the cohort studies that I was talking about earlier, we've Madeline Murta, the co-leader of my group, and also the chair of the MetaDAC in the UK, has done a lot of qualitative research trying to basically scope out with multiple stakeholders what their perspectives of the issue are. So there's quite a lot of information that lies there. Clearly, it's very specific to that particular area, but if that is A, she's managed to do it apparently quite successfully, and B, there is a lot of information.
Great. Could we capture? Do you have? Is there a way to get that link or kind of feed that into the? Okay, great. All right.
Great, thank you very much.
Our last expert voice today, before we kind of get into a roundtable discussion, is Christoph Bruch, who's at the Helmholtz Association for German Research Centers. I will try not to whip out my German college degree and try and pronounce that in German for you all. But we wanted to look at some of the sort of international legal issues here, again, without, say, writing tomes on legal policy. But Christoph, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me first. I really appreciate that. It has been a very interesting session, and we'll become a little bit more legal right now. Actually, I have a two-part presentation. The first part concerning a big cohort study is just to illustrate some of the issues, and the main part actually is the second or third part, or I'm probably going to jump the commercial in the beginning, is the part about the international setting for sharing data. And as part of that, I will come back to two questions we had just before the lunch break that was about this village and whether they would have access to the data, because there's a clear perspective on that from the legal point of view. And also several times it was mentioned that the term research data is not so clear, but it has a meaning in the context of the statutory law applying to data protection. So that is the commercial. I jump here and go direct to this German national cohort study. So this is a real big study that has started, well, they actually started getting the samples and interviewing people about a year ago, but of course planning for the cohort study started much earlier. So they intend to have a cohort of 200,000 persons, and they want to follow them for 25 to 30 years. And of course, collect a whole lot of data, which poses all kinds of issues concerning data protection. So that has been a big question around that. And we're talking also about genetic data here. We're talking about biosamples and what have you. So all the bad things are coming together here, all the tricky questions. And it's not just one interview. They go on all the time, and I'm going to link that to other databases. So this is just an overview about the time span, what they have in mind. And it's a project concerning research institutions all over Germany that cooperate in that effort. So they have to come together in one concept. So the interesting thing here is that they have two data sources. The first data source are the data they're generating themselves within the project by interviewing people or by examining them. But then they also want to get data from other institutions that often do collect their data based on statutes that allow them to do so. So that is something that has to be guarded very closely, and I will bring that up again when I look more closely at the legal implication. But I want you to keep that in mind, that they have these two sources, one source where they generate the data themselves, and the other source where they get the data from third parties. Now, they did a whole lot to have a sound data protection policy. They cooperated with all the experts, and they worked on it for years. They produced this really complicated thing to meet the demand of everybody. But at the end of the day, of course, they still got criticism. And I'm mentioning this, and I won't go into all the details. The important thing is, this is a huge project. They have a lot of money, and they have people who can look at that full time. And they made a very genuine effort to do it good. But still, there were problems. Now, you can imagine smaller projects that basically do the same thing, just on a smaller scale, but the legal issues are just the same. And so in practice, it's very, very difficult for them to find a way to actually deal with that. So they will need external people who help. They will not be able to do that on their own. And even if they get external help, there needs to be some kind of blueprint. Otherwise, there's no way for the average research group to deal with all the issues that come out of this data protection regulations. And that, at this stage, I'm not talking about international implications. That's just very basic things. And we learned this morning about all the technical issues. And for me, it was very interesting to think about the technical development may mean that some precaution you had in place at one time may not seem sufficient a few years later. And I haven't thought about what that really means, because that is something that could be a major problem for all the repositories we have that do collect personal data. So at the end of the day, the research community is committed to data protection. That's very obvious. And they try hard, but then, on the other hand, they have their research interest. And so for them, it's very difficult to anticipate what they could possibly do with the data they collect. So there is a tension, and I personally believe it's not enough to leave the data protection just to the researchers, because for them it's very difficult. They have like two minds in their head to deal with that. There needs to be an external, I think, an external place for them to cooperate with. The ethics committees can be that, but I think we actually need something more for the data protection, which is not in place as of now, because the data commissioners we do have, their primary job is to look at the data protection within the public institutions, and the data protection officers we have within the research institutions are overwhelmed, because this will be just one or two persons in a huge institution, so they are not in the position to actually help all the individual projects. I think I mentioned actually most of what is here. Yeah. The situation I described is aggravated by the fact that there are new demands, which we talk about usually in the context of open science, to make data available, to reproduce studies. So in many cases, that will not be possible if you at the same time want to honor the data protection rules. And I don't have a solution for that. It's just a fact. And that is, I think that is something that could be addressed in these interest groups, that it's not possibly at the same time to honor all the obligations that come with the data protection laws and make the data available for third parties, because then you can make the data only available in a very limited way. Also, we have to keep in mind that to a large extent, the data we're talking about will, or making the data available, will not only have implications for the people who gave the data originally, but it will have implications for other people. So that is something we cannot cover with the usual idea of having an informed consent. And again, I don't have a solution for that. But with these big studies, as I just described, there are these implications are very clear. So I think we need to actually have a second look and think what needs to be fulfilled in order for having such big studies, and at the same time see for it that the data do not get used for stuff they should not be used for. So that's the problem with the informed consent. That doesn't work at all. The informed consent form for the study I mentioned, for the cohort, it's 16 pages. So you can imagine that a lot of people will not understand it. Now, in order to honor data protection rules, they said the consent is only good for 5 years, but then it's renewed automatically if the people don't object, which is a problem, I think. And I don't know if that will stay that way, but that was the latest. And the data protection concept that was developed as part of this cohort study, and they've been working on that for, I think, 2 years by now, is not finished. They keep working on it because it's so complicated that they have to still add things. And if you download, it's publicly available. If you download the paper, you will find blanks. And they say, we still have to do that, we still have to do that, and that, and that. And that's after 2 years of working on that. Now the international setting. Basically, the international setting doesn't change that much because the data protection law basically says you can only do with the data something for which you have either a statutory basis or you have a consent. So if you want to use it in an international context, if that is important, you need to have a consent for that. And then you could possibly do it. If you don't have the consent, then you can't. So, and you need consent for all kinds of possible uses. So the question actually is, what do we think, how detailed does this consent have to be? And usually people would not have an objection against a use in an international context because that's not actually not that important. They want to know what could possibly harm them, but that is usually not connected to a trans-border shifting of the data. But from the legal perspective, it makes a big difference. Because from the legal perspective, certain things are regulated in one jurisdiction and they may be regulated differently in another jurisdiction. And the funny thing here is there's a big difference between reality and the fiction of the law. In reality, the differences between two countries may not be all that big. But from the point of view of the lawyer, he looks at the law of one country and at the law of the other country, and there may be a big difference. And he assumes that the reality is like the law here and the reality there is like the law there. But of course, the reality is not that different. So the idea that we either need to harmonize the law or we need to have some kind of arrangements to bridge the differences makes sense for the lawyers because they think there's so much different because the law is so much different. In reality, I think there actually isn't all that much difference. So we have, actually we're solving a problem that to a large part exists on paper only. I do that here. Now within the European Union, it was tried to harmonize the law. So they had a first data protection directive in 1995, and the idea was to have a level playing field. But in fact, they didn't get it via that law. Instead, what they got was quite big differences in the protection level, and many big companies choose Ireland because it had a very low level, and they wanted to change that. And first of all, they had to accept that the people went to Ireland, and then also, with the big also American companies coming to Europe, they wanted to accept that data gets transferred to the United States. That was kind of an economic necessity. So they found a typical solution for lawyers. They negotiated for some time, and then they had a contract and said, now, if you abide by what's in that contract, by these principles, the safe haven principles, it's okay, because in a way, we export the European standard of data protection to the United States. Complete fiction, because the principles didn't change what was really happening or is happening in the United States. But that was done. And it went on for more than 10 years. And then we had the revelations by Snowden. And a student a law student from Austria sued the data protection commissioner or Facebook because they transferred their data to the United States. And that brought about a judgment by the European Court of Justice saying that the acceptance by the European Commission of the safe harbor principles as being a good guarantee for a high level of data protection in the United States was not sufficient. Again, this is only in the paper world, because what they did now, they renegotiated that, and just a few weeks ago, they signed the EU-US Privacy Shield. Now, if you look at the Privacy Shield, it's better than the safe harbor principles, but the basic issue that the Secret Services access data in a problematic way still remains. And that is not something that is limited to the United States. That happens in other places too. But from the lawyer's point of view, they just compare the legal situation and not so much the reality. So I don't think it helps anybody that we have this new privacy shield now. Especially it doesn't help people who want to use research data because at the end of the day, people need to trust, and they don't trust as long if they think that some strange meddling with their data is going to happen, and they know that their data will be, if they use Facebook and stuff, it will be accessed by the Secret Service. At least that's the fear. And of course, in the context of the research data, for example, the pharmaceutical companies are the fear that it's going to be used there. The other fear is that the Social Security institutions are going to use it. We already have problems with our health insurance. They start to divide people in different groups with different risks and charge different rates for the insurance. All that is connected to this. Let me check here. I already have all that. Yeah. So let me get to some of the features that I think are really interesting. What was one outcome of the problems with getting a level playing field for the data protection within Europe was that the data protection directive we had was replaced by a data protection regulation. That's a big difference. In European law, a directive means a directive is addressed to the member states of the European Union, and the member states of the European Union pass laws that then are important for the people. It's not directly, the directives don't work directly, whereas a regulation works directly. Now we have that regulation, which in theory at least is directly applicable in all the member states. In practice, the member states will still keep their data protection laws, but they will be harmonized more than they used to be harmonized. And if you look at the new data protection regulation, you see that it has a lot of privileges for research. So that's the good news at the end of the day. Because a lot of the obligations that are within the law can be lowered if you use the data within research for research purposes. For example, the standard for the informed consent can be lowered, but for that we do need laws in the member states. So at this point, we have the new regulation in force, but the member states have 2 years' time to pass their laws, and they will do so, and only then will we see how they will actually implement all these possibilities. But we can assume that they will have special treatment for the research use of personal data. What's also important is that often we have associated with the research data the necessity to erase them after some time. That can be lifted for research data. But that is very good for the research community. Also, a very tricky thing is the information, right? The data subjects have. Also here, the standard can be lowered in the research context. And there will also probably be some special regulations concerning the international data transfer. So what we can, the message we can take home is that we have new laws in Europe for data protection, that they will harmonize data protection more than they used to, and that they have a lot of options for the lawmakers in the member states to privilege research, which they will probably do. But of course, this will not solve many of the questions that are posed in the day-to-day work. So we need a backup or additional help for the people within the research community. And I think that is actually something for this interest group here, because I think if you worry too much for these legal things, that doesn't really help. Because it's so complicated and so far away from everyday reality, we actually need to have some kind of, I think, blueprints that can be used for especially smaller research projects. Otherwise, they don't have a way to really cope with these complicated measures. Okay, I had that already. Thank you very much.
Firstly, a comment. I mean, I've seen research that suggests that people are not so willing to give their data to people in other countries. So people say, I want my data to stay in Germany or in UK or in... Do you think that is the case? I mean, we are data sharing advocates, but it may be possible that people do not want their data shared internationally. So I wondered if you had a thought, if that's actually one of the questions that is asked.
It's actually, I think, right now in Germany, it's very fashionable to bash the US in respect to their data protection or to their perceived low level of data protection, because people think, the NSA is meddling everywhere all the time. So that may be a sentiment you will hear. But otherwise, people will probably not object against using the data within Europe. And I think it may be a thing they have at first. If you ask them, it's like if you, no matter in which country you are, if you go to the supermarket and buy your potatoes, it's German potatoes, English potatoes, and depending on in which country you are, they say the potatoes from your countries are better than the potatoes from the neighboring country, which of course they aren't. So I think people only worry about a transfer of the data if they think that they lose protection they would otherwise have. But in fact, that is not the case, because what can be done with the data is determined either by the statutes or by the consent. And what is not covered by the consent cannot be done, because you have to make sure, if you transfer data, that you abide by the contract you had. But that may be complicated to explain. But then we go back to the problem that the whole idea of this informed consent doesn't actually work. We had a big thing in the news in Germany, because there was the idea to use data of Alzheimer patients and get their consent in a late stage of their disease when they're actually not able to consent anymore. That was creepy. And I think if people get the feeling that someone wants to make a buck they don't like that. We had problems with organ donations, and some fraud was uncovered, and that led to a drop in the rate of organ donation. Now, that could, of course, happen to for people who are willing to cooperate in these cohort studies or something. But basically, I think people are not against having their data used in an international setting.
Well, I've just reviewed a paper that says they are, so we'll see if that comes out. But the other question I had is to do with this huge study and setting up all your governance.
Yeah.
I mean, in UK, we've had the UK Biobank inventing its governance,
Yeah.
and Genomics England inventing its governance. Is there any point at which we stop inventing new governance and say there must be some best practice somewhere we should go to?
Well, from what I can see, I think in a way we are in early stages. We are in early stages because of the massive development of technology. I mean, if we learn all the time that we have to change our encryption because it's not working any longer. We just learned that if we anonymize something, and a few years later it can be de-anonymized. So you have to rethink this all the time. And I think something that may be best practice today may not be best practice, in 2 or 3 years time. And I think, and that's a pretty bleak thought, but I still think we do need some mishaps to happen. I mean, it's true in different circumstances. It's only after mishaps happen, you can see certain problems and change them, and you get the majorities you need.
Thanks, Christoph. That's very interesting. As a practical point, in terms of international data sharing, and in talking specifically about the ALSPAC project and the 1958 birth cohort, what we find in practice that we have problems sharing our data with the United States, but this actually relates entirely to the intellectual property issue. In that one of the things that the various particular jurisdictions in the United States are very strong about is that they want to actually own bits of data that get transferred to them, whereas our governance systems specify that the ownership of the study remains. Well, in fact, it's actually undefined, but it remains with the funders and the various institutions that run them in the UK. And so I think it seems to me that there's an issue about trying to also sort out how we deal with these very special rules about intellectual property, because literally there are 1 or 2 places in the United States which are just simply not able to get access to data that everyone else in the whole world can, because they have lawyers that say we've got to own the data once we get it. So I think there's issues on that side as well as the issues on the individual.
Well, I'm surprised because, basically speaking, you cannot own data. I mean, that's a problematic concept, ownership in that context.
Literally, we just had to not share some data in the last week with an American group because the lawyers there wanted to say they owned it, whereas we didn't want to be specific about it like that. So I mean, I agree with you, but what I'm saying is that there are, as well as the issues that you're raising, there are additional issues of clarification which would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, from my experience actually is, and that comes back to your question in the back, the main hurdle to data sharing, I think, are not the patients or the interviewees. It's usually the researcher who does not want to share the data because they want to use them themselves, and they don't get very much credit for making their data available. So I think that is actually the major hurdle. And and the major hurdle from for data protection is at the beginning. If you negotiate with the people from whom you want to collect the data to agree what you can do with the data, that's really very, very complicated. Once you got that, of course, you have to make sure that you stick to these conditions, but then transferring that is actually not that big of a challenge, I think. It becomes a challenge in this commercial context where the data are transferred into another jurisdiction, and then you have the issue, and that was, I didn't go into that detail, the issue that led to the problem with the safe harbor principles is that the European citizens do not have a legal possibility to redress if they think that their data have been accessed illegally in the United States. That was the first main thing, and the other thing was that the Commission didn't care about that, and that they overstepped their scope by agreeing to principles by which they endangered data protection rights that are enshrined in the Charter of the Basic Rights, and they've been corrected by the European Court. And now we have a contract that honors these issues, but I think in reality it will not keep the security, the secret services from accessing data, and I don't think the NSA is any worse than the German or the English or whatever.
Question to your point about sharing data, and within the Research Data Alliance, they were just published a data legal interoperability guidelines. Might one way around your problematic sharing or some desire by some other entity to say claim copyright over data that you've created and are sharing, wouldn't one way to do that be assign a Creative Commons license to the data, regardless of whether or not you think it is copyrightable? Just say, this is CC BY, and you're using it, and we hold the copyright. You can reuse it, but you can't claim copyright on it because it's Creative Commons.
Okay, so first of all, I'm not that knowledgeable in the detailed legal issues here. The specific issue that's arising is that we provide a large amount of basic secondary use data, which is freely available and can go anywhere in the world. Okay. What the specific problem that arises is that one of the requirements that we have is that any new data that is created, for example, if some additional work is done or genotyping is done, the results need to be returned to the central original study resource so that we can then make it available to other people, and that's written into the governance principles of the project. Now, 99% of all places that we want to send it to, this is absolutely fine and there's no issue. But there are a small number of groups, and it's the lawyers in the groups, it's not the groups, that basically say, if we create some extra data, we've got to own that and you can't have it back. And basically, I'd like to be able to think that we could get around it by having a sensible memorandum of agreement and then doing it through the Creative Commons. But this particular instance just seems to be too tough. It's just weird.
Okay.
Now
that makes much more sense.
The paper you mentioned, yeah, I've been part of the group that wrote that paper. It's focused on the IPR, and we mention data protection, But the big difference, and that's why we could not have a CC BY-like license for data protection issues, is that we do not have the uniformity. If I collect data and have an individual agreement with you, what I may and may not do with this data, then it's so individual that there's no way I can transform it into a standard license-like thing as the CC licenses. That would only work if we would try to have chunks of very small aspects, probably hundreds, that could be part of a consent agreement, and they could be labeled, and then we could say, okay, so this consent is the following 20 of the 100, but in theory that could work, but I think in practice that's quite complicated. And there are projects that try to do that for IPR. So they look at old licenses and try to find a way to transport what's in them in a standardized way. And I think that will not work because they are so different that you need so many standards that actually it's no standard anymore.
So I think it's entirely too early to ask this question, but it'll be interesting to see in a few years what the definition of research is, because I suspect that that's the real interesting question. Like, if I'm a marketing company and I do some market research, does that count as research?
It's like also was mentioned earlier on about the difference between research and evaluation, leading to this major difference of perspective in the United States. So, similarly, in the UK, there's a major difference between what counts as research in healthcare and what can be called audit. If you can call it audit, then you basically get away with anything. Whereas if you call it research, you've got to go through the whole of the rigor. And I mean, I agree with you that this fundamental issue of what is research is A, very hard to determine, B, is changing with time, but I think we really do need to try and sort it out.
But the question whether it's commercial or not, I don't think influences the question whether it's research or not. I mean, it may be difficult to define whether it's research, but if we think it's research, it can be commercial or non-commercial, but these are two different categories.
It has the same issues as the other question I asked.
And I still owe you, I still owe you the answer to the village.
Right. So when you're starting to, we have these new terms, right? Things like citizen science and things like that, where a lot of the research is now being done by communities because they need the answer to some question. And, they may or may not consult with a, quote, PhD kind of person. And so I think it's a very fuzzy line that I think is moving pretty quickly. So that's the reason why I brought it up.
So what I wanted to mention for that village question was that according to the European data protection law, the data subject has always the right to get access to his or her data. But what, of course, is for that, the example was interesting because, for that village, that would mean that the individual inhabitant of the village has the right to get access to his or her data, whereas there would not be a right for the community as a whole to get access of the data of everybody. But then, of course, the concept behind that is outdated because in many respects, because the concept behind that is that the data you gave pertain to you only. And of course, we now know in many circumstances the data do not only pertain to you personally. So, for example, I hated that my family uses WhatsApp because I know, even though I don't use it, their phone book gets read from that app. Or my children, they are on Facebook, and I don't know if they have pictures of me there, and all that. So that is something I don't like at all, but I cannot do anything about it. So I don't have, even if someone from my family would decide to participate in one of these studies and give genetic information, I cannot do anything about it.
If in the situation where the subject of the data collection should have a right to get access to that data, how do we work in a situation where say Micah's team has anonymized it in such a way that we can't provide it back?
That is one of the privileges I mentioned that can be implemented because obviously you cannot at the same time do a total anonymization, which cannot be changed, and then say this is the data from him or whatever. That is of course not possible. But I don't, it's depending on how you do it. I don't know much about he can help with that, with the technology. I mean, in many cases, the anonymization is not done in a way that it can't be changed. And I wasn't sure about this thing you showed about this privacy shield thing where you ask at the various databases. Isn't there a way I can recalculate that, going backward?
Sorry, Paul.
So, two settings. First of all, you can't, from individual analyses, there is no way you can go back either on the method using the sufficient statistics, which is our main work, or the encryption-based method.
Yeah, I meant the first one.
You can't go back on either of them. No, basically there's not enough. Effectively, the information is so collapsed in a sense that there's no way that you can uncollapse it without knowing more about it. However, what is very true relates to the fact that there are other inferential forms of disclosure. It's just as susceptible to, if you do repeated analyses asking for nearly the same question but very slightly different, allowing for looking at working on the overlap, then it's just as susceptible as any other form of release to that. So that's one of the areas that we're focusing on in relation to how to try and control that.
So I just want to echo one of the things you said, which I think is an important key point for this group, and that is that dealing on things on an individual basis is no longer good enough, and that you need to think about what is the community. It may be a single person, it may be a village, it may be a family, or there's maybe a racial group, I don't know. But there are communities that have concerns and should have rights here that need to be protected in terms of privacy and those sorts of things. And I think this group needs to, whatever comes out of this group, needs to understand and talk about that.
And I would add that it's not enough to think about these communities, but we care about data protection because of the risks that are associated if something is done with the data we don't want to be done with them. So I think it should not, we should also think about limiting the misuse cases in a way. For example, I'm thinking about this health insurance thing. So we can collect all kinds of data, but we would need to have a statutory law stating that we cannot have different health insurance rates depending on personal health risks. We don't have that yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, I guess, to the answer for the community. So we've been talking about having access to your personal data, right? But of course, there's a big difference between having access and being allowed to use or reuse this kind of data. Is that also relevant in this case, I think?
Well, I mean, if I give data to the project and later ask them, because I lost them or whatever, to give them back to me or give me a copy, that is more realistic, then of course I can use that. I don't see, for the cohort study, there's this interesting thing. Of course, they're doing medical examinations with you, which would not have been performed if you would not have been part of the study. So in theory, one could say, because they invested something, you could not use that. But in practice, I don't think there could be a limitation. And as an analogous, if you ask for data based on a freedom of information law, you usually are able to use the data if the data you requested is not protected by copyright.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so just one thing that we are experiencing in our research in Future TDM is indeed, okay, you can get access to this kind of data, but what kind of format are they giving you this data in? For example, if they would give all my data in PDF format, that would still be quite difficult to use in further research. So that's also, I think, a nuance that we have to address here as well.
Yeah,
I don't have an answer to that.
Several times in your talk, I really like the idea of talking about things that are just on paper. Coming down to this Freedom of Information Act issue, we've got a situation in relation to the feedback of genetic results, where in practice, if someone approached us under the Freedom of Information Act, then they should, as you say, be able to get hold of their data. On the other hand, we've got this extremely specific statement that we're not allowed to break, which is that we must not feed back any information about the genetics results because they all signed up at the start never to receive that. And so basically I have no idea what the solution to that is, but we sort of feel, it's obviously a difficult situation to know how to resolve. And it represents...
No, all the freedom of information laws have a long list of exemptions, and one of them are privacy reasons. So there should not be an issue.
I was going to comment simply on your comment, Paul. In that, in effect, the informed consent by the point we've reached has been broken because we didn't tell them this was a possibility. So this is one of the problems with these big longitudinal studies. Originally, people were told there is no information coming, therefore we won't feed anything back. Had you said at the beginning, we might find out your breast cancer risk in quite high probability, would you like to know? People would have said yes and some people said no, but we didn't ask them, so we don't know what their answer would be. So therefore you could argue that the informed consent has lapsed, and therefore we should do what we are medically obliged to do if we were medics, or what is ethically obliged to do if we're ethicists. It becomes slightly more difficult rather than, we just didn't tell them.
But of course, you know that you and I both think that. But of course, we know that there are some other people who hold very strongly opposite views to that, which is difficult.
Okay. Well, great. That fantastic. Certainly elicited a lot of really interesting conversation there. We're going to take what time is it? We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll reconvene and start a roundtable conversation about some of these issues. Again, focused, and this will be led by Bonnie, kind of teeing up some of the topics that were kind of surfaced during the conversations today, but then looking at, again, where we can take this in a practical vein towards moving the interest group forward. So we'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Again, what we'll do on the live stream is just cut it here, and then re-kick it off in 15 minutes. So if you're on the live stream, 15 minutes, we'll be back. Thanks.